Welcome to the Wine Nirvana podcast. Wine reviews for the average wine drinker. No pretense, no snobbery, no numerical ratings. And here's our host, Stephen Hawk.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, it is your wine guru, hoping to lead you into wine enlightenment, or at the very least, wines worth drinking. You know, in the tradition-bound world of wine, winemaking has, predictably, been dominated by men. For example, there are about 4,800 wineries in California, but only 10% have female lead winemakers. When it comes to winery ownership, the number does jump up to about 19%, according to Women-Owned Wineries, a nationwide directory of female wine entrepreneurs. Encouragingly, however, greater educational opportunities, as opposed to the historically more usual inheriting a wine operation, or perhaps being an apprentice, have been opening the possibility of becoming a winemaker to more and more women. One of these is Nicole Walsh of Ser Winery in Aptos, California, due east of Santa Cruz. Nicole, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start at the beginning? I know that you got your start in the winemaking business through education at Michigan State, but you were one of only 2 students at the time. So tell me a little bit about that first experience.
Sure. I chose horticulture as my major midway through college and was trying to decide on which avenue in horticulture to take. And I knew at a certain point after an internship on a vegetable farm that I wanted perennial crops. And I thought, I was looking at all different types of fruit and dawned on me, wait, you can make wine from grapes. Found out that Michigan State had their own winery, their own experimental vineyards throughout the state for viticulture. And
that's interesting.
At the time, as you mentioned, the undergrad program did not have a department of viticulture and enology, but the graduate department did. And so some graduate professors approached me and said, hey, do you want to make some wine this year, this fall, and kind of see what it's like and if you like it? And that's really how I got started, was just that first fall of trying it out, making my first 5 gallons of Seyval Blanc, which is a hybrid white grape. And I was very fortunate that they took such care, the graduate professors, in encouraging myself and this other, who actually was a woman, to explore the world of wine and to continue and make, tailor-made my curriculum for, woody plant physiology and fermentation science and, a lot of independent study and a lot of hands-on experience, actually going around the state, looking at, working with the experimental vineyards, pruning on my spring breaks, working in the winery at the college. And so it just was an amazing experience, actually. And what actually landed me a job eventually in Santa Cruz was that I had so much hands-on experience throughout my college days.
Right. So you didn't show up just as an academic.
Right. I did work in Michigan as well, in northern Michigan, in the wine industry there. After college, I managed vineyards and started my winemaking. And there, really small places, you end up doing everything, learning, working in the tasting room. I ran the lab. You manage the crews. You do pretty much everything.
So was that up at the in the Lalano Peninsula?
Leelanau.
Leelanau. There you go.
Yeah.
Leelanau.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
I've actually been there. It's a nice area. I find their whites more interesting than the reds, but they're making some pretty good white wines up there.
Yeah, they don't, unfortunately have quite the growing season for red wine.
Not quite. Yeah, indeed. So, what then took you from Michigan to California, where the climate was more hospitable?
Well, in a roundabout way. Partly was my husband had a job opportunity in Santa Cruz. We had spent some time the year prior to our move exploring the area, and I was actually in a wine tasting group in Michigan, and I remember bringing back quite a few wines, and would do blind tastings. It was called Wine Pigs, and it was actually a bunch of restaurateurs with fantastic palates and amazing wine cellars. Actually, I was very one of the best tasting groups I've ever been a part of was that group, and we always tasted blind, and then would reveal and enjoy it with a meal. And I'll never forget, bringing back some of the Santa Cruz wines, and people were very impressed, and I was really excited about the area. So when we ended up moving, I thought this is going to be great. I'm going to make wine in Santa Cruz. That's really what started it.
What's the one thing you wish you had known at the beginning that you didn't, but you do now?
I think one of the biggest eye openers for me is related to where I am right now with having my own business, having my own wine label. And even along the way, I think I would have wished I would have known more about business in general, working for other wineries. I really do wish I would have taken some business courses. I wish I had more knowledge to this day about business. It's a whole nother world, and I'm learning fast. It's you have to keep up. But I think from the start, I wish I would have had a broader knowledge base.
Right. Aside from hosing out tanks, it's probably the least glamorous part of having your own winery, but of course, it's definitely essential. So, aside from your college mentors, who influenced you early on?
I'd say early on, really, like who ends up influencing me, I think, are the winemakers that I work closely with. I would say in Michigan, I worked with the state viticulturalist, actually. He owned or still owns Bel Lago Winery in northern Michigan. And his excitement for all kinds of varieties and experiments with those varieties in his own vineyards, always experimenting with wine styles and pushing, I think, some of the boundaries that Michigan wineries were doing at the time. That really was a positive influence for me, learning from him. And it wasn't just hybrids, it was finding a lot of Alsatian varietals that maybe were less known and getting those planted and coming up with some great wines and great blends. So I think I worked for Bonnie Doon in Santa Cruz for almost 20 years. And Randall Graham has been a huge influence for me. Again, the influence on pushing outside the box thinking and experimentation, and a love for so many obscure, unknown varieties. Really can't say enough about my experience with my journey, along the way with him. And another winemaker I worked with in New Zealand back in 2008, worked for a year with a winery called Churton, and the owner winemaker is Sam Weaver, and he had a profound influence on me with winemaking, his approach to wine, his encouragement to study more. I started along the path of the Wine and Spirit Education Trust and ended up getting my diploma from them as a stepping stone for a Master of Wine degree. And really, he was a huge influence on me for that.
Speaking of unusual varietals, I know that you make two expressions of a Cabernet Pfeffer, a grape I had never heard of. And apparently there's like 12 acres of this in all of California. How did you discover that, and how did you focus in on that as one of your projects?
Yeah, so 2012 was my first vintage for Ser, And early on in that year, it was like, okay, I'm going to start my own label. Now what? What am I making? What am I doing? And the first grower that I thought of, because I don't have any of my own vineyards, but I've worked with so many wonderful growers along the way in California. I knew I wanted to work with Pat Wers in Cienega Valley, which is about, it's on the east side of the Gabilan mountain range, maybe about an hour or so from where I live in near Santa Cruz. And he grows Riesling mainly. And he has some old vine Riesling that is really special. He dry farms, so no irrigation. They're head trained, so no trellis. He's an organic farmer, very, very old school, just really down to earth. And I thought, I love Riesling. I really want to make a Riesling. On top of, I wanted to work in the Santa Cruz mountains with Pinot Noir. But going out to see Pat and said, hey, I'm starting my own label. I'm very excited. I really want to have Riesling. And he's like, great, but I really want you to take some Cabernet Pfeffer. And I was like, what is that? I don't
Yeah, the what now?
I was really worried about it, to be honest, because I thought, I'm just starting out. I have precious resources that I can't waste. What am I going to do with this if it doesn't turn out? What am I was in such a vulnerable state of, okay, I'm putting my name out there and on this wine. And when I'm starting with an really obscure.
Really obscure, yes.
Okay, I guess that could be the direction. And so I said, okay, fine, I'll take a ton. Started with 1 ton, and it actually took me probably that year, even in barrel, to really appreciate the variety and come to know it for what it is. Because it does sort of reveal itself a little later. It kind of shuts down, after you press into barrel, and then over say just even that year of élevage, it just starts to really come into just such a dynamic wine, prizing because it's can be so delicate and elegant, but then it's got some nice structure. Though the vines that I'm working with they're 100 years old. So they've got just this wonderful mid palate that comes through, I think, just from the old vines and the concentration. He has decomposed granite and limestone soils, which tend to be so mineral driven and earthy. The earthiness comes through. Just really, to me, it's just a fantastic grape variety that I feel honored to work with.
Even out of the bottle, because I read up on it a little bit and expected the peppery component, which on the first pouring wasn't there, but boy, after about an hour, that just opened right up. So it is, it's a fascinating varietal. I'm delighted you're working with that.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to touch one more thing on the pepper. It's actually white pepper that comes through, which is such a different spice. And I try to make that distinction for people, because if you're looking for black pepper, it doesn't show up. There really isn't black pepper, which I think is almost another obscure, spice is white pepper. Not many people are familiar with it. And I tell people, go and get some white pepper and smell and experiment with it, even in your cooking, because if you could incorporate some of that with a dish and then pair the wine, you'll be amazed.
Indeed. So tell us about your special approach to winemaking, like your philosophy, if you will. And we can start with, in talking to winemakers, I find some talk about the wine is made in the fields, and others say, no, the wine is made in the winery. So what is your take on that? And then what is your approach to winemaking?
Sure. I mean, I absolutely believe that wine is made in the vineyard. My approach really has been to allow that pure expression and allow the potential of the fruit to shine through. And I really want to have that expression of that variety be true to the characteristic of the variety, to the vineyard, to the vintage. Something, that's, I think, amazing about wine that I always touch on a little bit of inspired to name my brand Ser because of an article I read from Andrew Jefford. It's called Wine and Astonishment. You can read it. It's pretty enlightening. It really resonated with me because it's talking so much about why wine is such an incredible medium to translate place. This concept of terroir, and why is it that wine can express place so well where so many other things don't or just can't. I mean, you might have a carrot or a tomato and be able to know it was grown in a certain farm, but there's other qualities that happen with the chemistry and fermentation and even the alcohol being able to lift that to another level.
And terroir is certainly a concept that's part of what makes wine so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating to be able to, once you do start to know grape varieties and be able to taste a wine and be able to tell where in the world it might be made. That's the part where if wine is being made and it's being covered up by lots of oak or additions and concentrates or whatever it is that make more of well, I don't know. I always think of like a soup, right? Like you've got so many ingredients and you're just trying to come up with a flavor profile instead of, my approach is really just stepping back, and I try to use as little additions and little new oak as possible, just trying to allow that wine to come into its own. And the only way for it to express where it's coming from, I think, is to have that more natural approach, more traditional approach, I'd say, more traditional.
Indeed, yeah, less interventionist. Now, obviously, at its heart, winemaking is based on agriculture, and certainly in this country, much of the labor in the fields is done by Hispanics. What has been your experience as a woman dealing with potentially people from a macho culture?
Yeah. So, yeah, in my education, I focused a lot on the language, the Spanish language, because I ended up going to school in Costa Rica for a semester. And so I did have a pretty decent background in Spanish, but only working with people in the wine industry, I started to really kind of have a deeper understanding of working hard and being able to connect and communicate, especially in Spanish. So I had a brief time with that. I'd say, when I moved to Santa Cruz, it started at Bonnie Doon Vineyard. I was the bottling winemaker. That was my first job. And I basically had to come in and run an established bottling crew of Hispanic guys that knew their equipment, knew what they were doing, had a system,
had a routine, you bet.
Yeah, and here I am, this young woman coming in as the boss, and it was extremely challenging, and it didn't go so well at first. Yeah, to say the least.
There may have been tension.
Well, it just, they weren't backing down, and I had to prove myself. And basically, it just comes down to working hard. I've always had a pretty strong work ethic. Talking about influencers, I forgot to mention my parents, and I'd say they're two of the main people that have given me that work ethic. And I don't back down from working hard, and that's really what I think gave me the ability to connect with the guys, and they respected how much I worked and was there, and didn't try to come in and act like I knew everything. I just wanted to start learning from them as well, and eventually I could lead them and show them what I knew, and maybe a different way to do something, more efficient way to do something. But it takes time. You have to be patient and have the ability to know that, we're all people and we're all trying to do a good job.
So what is your biggest challenge now? Like, what keeps you up at night?
Oh, like everything.
It just never stops.
Do I sleep lately? I, I won't go into all of the other things, but regarding wine, I think a lot keeps me up. Wine is a living thing, and it can be affected by all kinds of organisms and elements. Just even oxygen can affect it, and the logistics. Right now, I have to move out of my winery space, and the logistics of where I'm moving and how I'm doing it. The vintage keeps me up at night. The lack of water. There's just like so many things that I guess are a little bit worrying. I think I try to stay positive, of course, and just keep moving forward, and you just keep doing, you can't control certain things, and focus on the things that you can control. But it's a lot, I think about selling and events, and there's just a lot of pieces to the puzzle that keep me up. I think it's sort of that classic romanticizing the lifestyle of wine. It's hard to know how other people are potentially stereotyping the wine industry, or if what my life might be like. I remember even as back in high school, I guess, I remember always coming home and watching a soap opera that talked about Napa Valley and the wineries there. And I sort of had this view for a while of what California was like, and the wine areas there, and working there would just be like in a Tuscan village, and very, I don't know, just romantic and beautiful. And, we're not out here, at least in California, and I'm sure even in Europe as well. Not everybody's, lucky enough to just be living on some ancestral property that has bountiful fruit and, a whole plan of making wine and where it's selling. And, there's a hustle out here, and you've got to there's so much competition.
Yes.
Business, and it's agriculture, and it's dirty, and it's long hours, and it's headaches, and it's your blood, sweat, and tears. It's really just not as easy as maybe some people might think, and maybe people don't think that. I don't know. If that was the myth, then I'd like to debunk that.
Well, I do. I think that's true. I think many people are not aware of just the amount of manual labor that's involved in getting a wine produced. And it's it's in the field, it's in the winery.
You can't always find a trucking company to help you do this or that. I got to go rent a truck, rent my flatbed, go pick up the load myself, figure out everything that might go wrong with that truck and the straps and where to load the guy. And it's problem solving, but it's the manual part of that and the hands-on that you might not realize how involved, you do have to be. You can't just pick up the phone and have everyone kind of do it. There's so much of it that you just end up doing yourself.
Because you have to.
Yeah.
There's no getting around it.
You just have to. And you got to be ready for it. I got to go jump on the forklift, and I've got to go figure out how to fix this or that piece of equipment, or find the crew myself, or, you're just constantly, you've got to be ready to just jump in and know that, well, I'm going to have to do this myself.
Right. For sure. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Where can my listeners find out more about Ser Wines?
My website is one of the best places to find and read about the wines. It's Ser Winery, SER winery.com. And I'm also, on Instagram, Facebook, mainly, are my social media.
Okay, great. I do have a blog post on the site on Ser as well. So I encourage people to check that out. Well, thanks again, Nicole. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This has been Wine Nirvana. To learn more, visit us at www.winenirvana.com.
This is a production of Habanero